to election results and analysis, and we begin with Houston Public Media's politics and government reporter Andrew Schneider. Andrew, good morning.
Good morning.
Let's start with the race to succeed the late Congressman and former Houston Mayor Sylvester Turner in the 18th Congressional District. It's headed to a runoff between which candidates?
As we were hearing at the top of the hour, it's between acting Harris County Attorney Christian Menefee, who led the field, and former Houston City Council member Amanda Edwards, who came in a close second.
And when you say close second, what kind of numbers
we're talking about just 3 percentage points apart. Menefee garnered close to 29% of the vote, Edwards just under 26%. Apart from third-place finisher, State Representative Jolanda Jones, none of the other candidates made it into double digits.
And when you say other candidates, we're talking about a total of 16, I think, was it?
That was the total field, and it was a mix of Democrats, Republicans, and independents, and the top two finishers were two Democrats.
And those are who go to the runoff if no one garners 50% of the vote. There was also a Houston City Council seat on ballots Tuesday, also headed to a runoff between who?
Between Attorney Alejandra Salinas and former Houston City Council member Dwight Boykins. They'll both be going into the second round. Both scored just over 20%, with Salinas in a slight lead.
Okay. And I gather maybe a bit of a surprise to some anyway that Salinas wound up with the slight lead there?
I think somewhat. One of the things that I was hearing over the course of the campaign was that Boykins was getting something of a boost because his former seat on Houston City Council overlapped the 18th Congressional District by quite a bit, so that was expected to give him a boost. Didn't quite in the end.
When will those runoff elections take place?
The runoff for City Council will come first. That will be Saturday, December 13th. Under federal legislation designed to ensure overseas military voters are able to participate in federal elections, the congressional special election won't take place until at least January.
All 17 state constitutional amendments on the ballot passed. Briefly, roughly, what do they cover?
Roughly half of them dealt with taxation. Arguably, the most significant ones are those dealing with the homestead property tax exemptions. Proposition 13 increases the base homestead exemption for all property owners from $100,000 to $140,000. Proposition 11 gives an additional exemption of an additional $50,000 on top of that for over 65 and disabled homeowners. On non-tax-related items, we have Proposition 3, which requires judges and magistrates to deny bail to people accused of certain violent or sexual felonies. Prop 4 dedicates up to $1 billion a year in state sales tax revenue to a fund for building and repairing water infrastructure for the next 20 years. Prop 12 gives the governor a much stronger hand in disciplining or removing elected judges. And Prop 14 creates the Dementia Prevention and Research Institute of Texas. Will allocate $3 billion towards that. That's similar to an institute the state created to combat cancer.
Any other results you wanted to note here this morning?
Oh, probably the most significant ones are from an election outside Texas. California voters overwhelmingly approved a plan to redraw that state's congressional map in a way that potentially could shift 5 Republican seats to the Democratic column. That could completely offset any gains the Republicans were hoping to make in Congress by pressing Texas to redistrict this past summer.
And what was turnout like overall on Election Day itself?
It was about 223,000 in Harris County, which was slightly higher than the total number of voters who turned out to vote early.
All right. Well, you can find more about Tuesday's election at HoustonPublicMedia.org. Andrew Schneider covers politics and government for News 88.7. Andrew, thank you.
You're welcome.
And joining us now to discuss Tuesday's election results further in our regular Wednesday political roundup are University of Houston political science lecturer Nancy Sims and UH political science professor and party politics co-host Brandon Rottinghaus. Nancy, Brandon, good morning.
Good morning, Craig.
Any surprises for you coming out of Tuesday's elections here in Houston and across Texas, first of all?
I think I was a little surprised by the closeness of the City Council at-large 4 race, where Dwight Boykins and Alejandra Salinas finished neck and neck, with Salinas slightly in the lead. So I think people weren't expecting her to do that well. And so that was a little bit surprising. She had raised a lot of money and worked really hard. And as Andrew mentioned, Dwight Boykins had relied very heavily on his name ID of having served in office before.
Brandon?
I'm a little surprised about the turnout, which was better than I expected. There was a discussion from the Secretary of State that they were going to hit about 20%. That was pretty ambitious. But the fact that this got as high as it did, I think, is a good sign that there's a kind of robustness to a lot of these races, and people are engaged in ways that I think are really good.
Still, it wasn't great.
No, not great at all.
About 10%
Yeah.
in Harris County.
Yeah, I guess
10, 15.
I was going to say there's one way of looking at it. You could say, ooh, near record turnout for an off-year election. On the other hand, that's a very low bar.
It did. It beat the standard, but not by much. But if you look at places like Tarrant County, Collin County, Bexar County, turnout was up there too, in part because there were things on the ballot people really cared about. And
right.
I think that's the key, is just making sure that the candidates are, engaged, and you've got things that people care about. So if you offer options to voters, they'll come vote.
I also wanted to point out, among other things, there were a number of school board races decided yesterday. I want to zero in just for a moment on Cy-Fair ISD. They had, I believe, a 6-1 conservative majority in that district. 3 more moderate to left-leaning candidates garnered the most votes in each of their positional races yesterday. One might have won outright. The other 2 headed to runoffs. I imagine they still got to kind of do the final counts of that sort of thing. But we could see a shift in control there. Are you seeing more and more of that sort of pushback at the school board level?
Well, it's certainly been something over the recent years that the conservative movement zoomed in on school districts and targeted them and got a lot of their people elected. I think what you're seeing in Cy-Fair, where libraries closed, books were banned as a result of the conservative majority, is a real pushback from people with kids in the schools to say, hey, we need to be reasonable, not just completely focused on one side.
We did see conservative losses back in May in Katy, Clear Creek, and Fort Bend ISDs as well.
Yeah, these districts are becoming the new political partisan battleground, so I'm not surprised that it became like this. But obviously, it's a small kind of microcosm of how things are going across the country. There is real concern about public ed in Texas, and this definitely is part of that storyline. People want to get back to basics, and I think that some of this was about that rejection of the kind of culture wars. So I do think this represents a real split, and you can definitely see it forming even inside the Republican Party, where they were fighting about who to endorse and if to endorse. So there's just a lot of churn, and I think people were kind of sick of it. So
and
that's probably what
we
happened.
need to remember that Greg Abbott came down to Cy-Fair for a voter rally and turnout. Speaking of, I mean, it really doesn't matter because we embedded parental rights in the Texas Constitution yesterday. So
we heard Andrew talking about what happened in California, and of course other cities and states across the country held elections as well. Democrats, it would seem, had a good night. Much of the attention this morning has been falling on the elections of Democrat Abigail Spanberger as Virginia's next governor. Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill won the governor's race in New Jersey. Both are considered fairly moderate. And then self-proclaimed Democratic socialist Zohran Mamdani won the New York mayor's race. He is the first Muslim and South Asian in that post. He's also the youngest New York mayor, or will be in over a century. What are your big takeaways from those results?
I want to say it was a great night for women. Women, the first woman governor of Virginia ever elected, the first Democratic woman in New Jersey. They had a Republican female governor a couple of decades back. But very good night for women. And also both of them, well, all of the Democratic wins were higher in voting percentage than any polls predicted. So they won by 56, 58%, which is very definitive. They weren't close races.
Andrew noted the California redistricting and how those 5 seats may offset the 5 seats gained by Republicans in Texas, at least in terms of improving their chances. But those are not the only states that have been redistricting. So how is this all shaking out? Does one party have more of an advantage than the other based off of how these maps will ultimately be redrawn for next year?
Yeah, it's a good question. We're certainly seeing a lot more of this effort, and it won't be the last time that this is a national conversation. So we're going to continue to see states move in that direction. You're seeing Indiana question that. You're seeing Missouri. You're seeing Maryland. So there are a lot of places that are going to try to offset this. At the end of the day, it might just be a wash, which would be unfortunate because this frequent redistricting definitely creates this controversy and concern for voters about how they're going to vote. We're talking about CD18. About half the voters in CD18 now won't be in CD18 if the maps hold. So that definitely creates a sort of difficulty for voters to understand kind of what's going on. So that confusion really is problematic. But I agree with Nancy. I think it was a good night for Democrats. They certainly were able to overperform where Harris did in 2024. There's a coalition argument that they were able to satisfy, that younger people and voters of color, women, were able to kind of return to the Democratic fold. So that definitely is a good sign for them. But like, we can't read too much into these elections, right? I mean, the Republican candidate in Virginia had an underfunded race, didn't perform that well. All the Democrats outraised and outspent their Republican opponents in these elections. So it's a little misleading to say kind of this one election is the blue wave that's the challenge to Trump. But you have to look at this as, at least in part, a kind of slug to Donald Trump.
It's a taking the temperature. Mm-hmm. And speaking of CD18 and redistricting, whoever wins this primary runoff, the runoff in January, Andrew, right? Then whoever wins that will then likely have to face Al Green, who's been the congressman for District 9. And that's going to be in the March primaries.
Right.
And that's going to be, even
district.
Menifee or Edwards are both very fresh faces, young, exciting leaders that are then going to have to face Al Green. So that's a really interesting twist to the complications of Texas redistricting.
The federal government shutdown is now the longest in U.S. history. Any sign of anyone in Congress or the White House budging on anything?
I think we're going to see them tighten up a little bit and find a way to work together after the elections. And also, and we've discussed this before, Craig, is I don't think they're going to let us get to Thanksgiving with this shutdown because the airports are already out of control. And it was the air traffic controllers that caused it to solve in the past, and it's likely to be that this time as well. That
and TSA workers not getting paid, and some of them, as a result, not showing up, or one would assume getting other jobs if they can. Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah, I was personally sort of shocked by hearing some of the delay times at Bush Airport just a couple of days ago. I don't know how temporary that was, but the fact that was happening now and not in the week of Thanksgiving, oh boy.
Right.
Yeah. As someone who has to go to the airport after this, I'm a little worried about the shutdown prospect. Even if they closed the deal today, it still wouldn't affect me. But it definitely is affecting a lot of people. And I think Nancy's right that this is of concern. And certainly, I think that the election results were a kind of referendum on Donald Trump, at least enough that they're going to think twice about it. And Democrats will look at this and say, we can push for this. They read these results as saying that Donald Trump has gone too far and that voters want a return to normalcy. So it's possible that Democrats dig in a little bit here. That plus polling that suggests that by about a 10% margin that Republicans are blamed for this and Donald Trump is blamed for this, that it might be just enough wiggle to be able to get them to find a deal.
Sources close to Nancy Pelosi say the former U.S. House Speaker is poised to announce that she will not seek re-election. The potential news comes the same week former Vice President Dick Cheney died. In light of Tuesday's election results, you were just talking about some younger, fresh-faced candidates. Are we, in fact, starting to see a changing of the guard in politics? Maybe a long overdue one.
It's slow. I think if you look at kind of progressive politics, especially in a place like Texas, it didn't exactly take hold. Candidates like Isaiah Martin in CD18 didn't do that well. You had a lot of tax increase requests across the state that didn't pass, including Austin and Prop Q. So there is, I think, still a limit. But if you look beyond that, there are a lot of young candidates who are running. So the winners of the race in Virginia and in New Jersey were both 2018 members of Congress victors. So that's a definite, I think, swing. They're understanding kind of how to craft language and politics that work for them. And Pelosi obviously has been in power for a long time and was a trailblazer when it comes to the success that women have, but also Democrats. That unity, though, did come at a price where I think it's causing some of the type of inter-party division that you're seeing now.
Well, she did refer to the president apparently as a vile creature a day or two ago. So,
but she's in her 80s, and she served well, and I think she has the grace to step away as is appropriate. The real question will be Chuck Schumer, who, as you may have heard, Alessandra Ocasio-Cortez is talking about running against Chuck Schumer if he doesn't step down. New York Congresswoman who's young, very young, and went to Congress at 30, I think. So if she does run against Schumer, if he doesn't decide to retire.
What will be Pelosi and Cheney's legacies, respectively?
I think for Cheney, his legacy is about reforming and transforming the vice presidency. We did some survey work of experts on presidential greatness, and we asked them about vice presidents and vice presidential greatness, which seems like kind of a conundrum, right? Most people don't think about vice presidents, but Dick Cheney wasn't hugely influential as a policy advisor. He comes in at number 2 behind Al Gore. He also, I think, reset the stage for how it is that vice presidents are able to be governing partners so that they look at them as policy advisors and assistants instead of just as somebody who's going to balance the ticket a bit.
Yeah, I years ago interviewed an author named Shirley Ann Warshaw, who wrote a book called The Co-Presidency of Bush and Cheney, and she laid out how then Vice President Cheney made sure that someone from his staff was basically like the shadow, it had the exact same role as anybody from Bush's staff in any meeting just about anywhere in the White House. That if there was something going on, then there was somebody representing the president's office and somebody representing the vice president's office all the time. And it really did become a co-presidency in certain ways.
There's a great story about how Dan Quayle said, well, your job is going to be to go to funerals. And Dick Cheney smirked and said, that's not the arrangement that we have, which is I can imagine him doing this.
Well, and I think he'll always be remembered for the war on terror and his leadership in post 9/11. Whether you agreed with it or not, it was controversial to say the least at the time. But he will always be remembered for that.
President Trump may have legacy on his mind as he moves forward with his White House ballroom project, which the Washington Post reported this week is being funded by a lot of companies who have combined received over $279 billion in government contracts in the last 5 years. Now, of course, 4 of those 5 years were under the Biden administration. Post also finds over half of the companies spending money on the project are currently facing claims of unfair labor practices, environmental missteps, and consumer fraud. The Post cites a report from consumer advocacy group Public Citizen, which identifies more than 36 of the donors of the project. CBS News found 3 others. We're talking about among the companies NVIDIA, Google, Lockheed Martin, Comcast, some others. To some, this is politics as usual. To others, it's bribery. Still others probably assume bribery is politics as usual. How would you characterize it?
Well, I personally would say I think it contributed to the elections yesterday because I think the images of him tearing down the East Wing to build his grandiose ballroom when SNAP benefits are getting cut off was something that made voters uncomfortable. And one of my students said it's a let them eat cake feeling. Yeah. And I thought that was so insightful. But with his Great Gatsby Halloween party and all of that, when average working Americans and poor Americans are unable to pay their bills right now.
Once again, you can read about the results from Tuesday's election right now at HoustonPublicMedia.org. Brandon Rottinghaus is the co-host of Houston Public Media's Party Politics program. You can catch it Friday nights at 7:30 on News 88.7, Friday nights at 8 on Houston Public Media TV 8. It's available on YouTube as well and wherever you get your podcasts. Brandon's also a political science professor at the University of Houston. I guess he has a plane to catch. And Nancy Sims is a political science lecturer at the University of Houston and the co-host of the Default of Democracy podcast. Thank you both very much.
Thanks,
Thank
Greg.
you, Craig.